The Oklahoma Sooners offense actually returning quite a bit of production for 2025.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Jay, the Oklahoma Sooners are actually returning quite a bit of production relative to the rest of the teams in the SEC. The folks over at That SEC Podcast threw up a graphic on the social medias, and Oklahoma came in at fourth in percent of returning production in the SEC. Jay, what do you make of this?
Oh, it's pretty huge because that's been the big question about Oklahoma. It's what they're going to look like on the offensive side of the ball. And this is also not including transfers. So the returning production in their formula they have on here is passing yards and touchdowns, rushing yards and touchdowns, receiving yards and touchdowns, and O-line snaps. And that's the one thing to keep in mind with Oklahoma. We're bringing back a lot of our O-line snaps, from Fabechi Waywoo to Jake Taylor and Jacob Sexton. You're going to have back Troy Everett, and contrary to popular belief, Branson Hickman's coming back this year. Like, he has a super senior season left. So if he did not go and enter the draft, which I don't recall seeing a single thing where he said that he had entered the draft, he has one more year left. So you add that additional senior piece there, Heath Ozida, you still got Logan Howland. So a lot of that offensive line that you had that was really young or inexperienced, a lot of that's returning to go along with your entire running back room except for Emeka Megwa and Caleb Hicks, and then all the wide receivers that actually play. I mean, you technically only lost Bauer Sharp and the wide receiver production, but Deion Burks is back, Zion Kearney, Ivan Kerryon. You've got the list of all these wide receivers. I mean, you lose Brendan Thompson as well as JJ Hester. But John, if you really look at it, you're returning a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball that now you just need to go out there and execute with.
You know, it's returning talent. It's also returning talent that has to get a lot better.
Yep.
At the same time, this group of young offensive linemen got a lot of experience last year as Oklahoma was dealing with a lot of injuries. Logan Howland, Heath Ozida weren't expected to be significant role players when you started the season, but you lost a lot of guys to injury and you had to play them. Your only kind of big significant offensive line loss was Michael Tarkin. And that dude played a lot and he played well for you. So you have to replace that. At the same time, you got a lot of young guys, a lot of experience, and that's going to matter as they develop. I mean, yes, it wasn't perfect. Yes, there were areas where they've got to be a lot better, whether it was in the South Carolina game where they gave up a bunch of sacks, or the Ole Miss game, especially there towards the end where Logan Howland had some struggles against guys that are going to be top 50 picks in the NFL draft. Not too surprising for a guy to get thrown out there, his first real extended action, and then struggle a little bit. The offensive line had some ups and downs over the final 4 or 5 games of the season, but there were some ups, right? There were some things that you could take from those performances and build on. Is it something that we're going to be feeling completely solidified about and feeling really solid about? Probably not until we see it against Michigan in week 2. That's the thing we keep coming back to, right? Is what we see against Michigan in week 2, especially along the offensive line, is going to be very indicative of what this team's going to be in 2025. But you're bringing back a lot of snaps. And I think that does matter. The experience part of that does matter. And having guys that have played a little bit together, are getting more familiar with what Bill Bedenbaugh expects for them. And you do have a couple veteran pieces in Troy Everett and Fabechi Waywoo to lead the way. You bring in some veterans in Derek Simmons and Luke Baklenko to add to that and provide some competitive depth. And you bring in the young guns, Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foje, Owen Hollenbeck, and Darius Afalava to add more competitive depth, to push those guys that were part of the 2024 class to see if they can't push those veterans and earn some snaps. I think everybody's expecting an Eddie Pierre-Louis to push for a significant role in the offensive line lineup, but he's going to have to beat out a Heath Ozida or a Fabechi Waywoo or a Jacob Sexton. So there's going to be a lot of competition this offseason. And aside from Troy Everett and maybe Fabechi Waywoo, everything's wide open.
And that's the good thing is because Troy Everett was your most consistently good offensive lineman when he got healthy, when he was able to play after Tennessee. Febechi Iwu was your most consistent, as in he's the only one that actually played majority of the season. I don't recall him actually missing any games. Now I think about it, he didn't miss a single one. So he's the only one that actually played every single game this past season. And like you said, you're going to be able to see some of the young guys actually fighting for some of those spots. We want to see more Eddie Pierre-Louis, but the only thing that held him back is that he was kind of undersized because he had went and ran track there in the spring. And so now that he's, back and healthy, back and he's in shape and he's learning the playbook, I can expect him to see some more run. Isaiah Autry did. We start to see him get a little bit of run late in the season, and look at him now. There's a good chance that he could also fight for some opportunities to play. And so the big piece is, especially when it comes to the offensive line, is that, that line was super young. Last year, you had a lot of those, mainly those freshmen from the 2024 class that we were excited about, but you didn't want to play too early. They got some valuable experience. They got played in certain spots where you wanted them to play. And in some situations, they were thrown in. Like Logan Howland was thrown in, like you mentioned, but he improved week over week. It wasn't perfect, but he did improve week over week. And so the good thing, too, is that when you bring in this 25 class, Ryan Fogier and Michael Fasusi, who could potentially go in there and probably play almost day one. All you need is those guys to actually get better. And if they don't, those young players, I think they're actually two young players that can play day one. They have the capabilities to be able to do that. And I know other schools have recruited them for the exact same thing. So we actually are in a good problem this time around instead of having a whole bunch of dudes that have like no experience. So that's going to jump out and help out. Then you have the wide receiver room. And like you said, all of these numbers don't include a single transfer yet. Adding those in, I'm really excited to see what the numbers are going to look like.
Yeah, the wide receiver room is going to be interesting to follow because you've got Deion Burks back, you got Jaden Gibson back, and then you're bringing in some talented dudes that have production at different places, and you're trying to figure out, okay, who is going to be starting on the outside alongside Deion Burks and presumably Jaden Gibson. At running back, listen, I like the group that they have at running back. You've seen really good things out of all of those guys, whether it's, Gavin Sawchuk in the 5 straight 100-yard games to finish the 2023 season, Javonte Barnes. And listen, he was one of your best offensive players in 2024. That may not be saying a whole lot, but somewhere in the middle part of the season, Javonte Barnes really hit his stride and he was playing really good ball. But you go back to his true freshman season in 2022 and he became your RB2 as a true freshman, a very talented guy. Xavier Robinson emerged and became one of your better offensive players at the end of the season. That Alabama game, I mean, that was a fantastic game that he played in that one. And Taylor Tatum's got the talent to be a big time playmaker. Just got to learn how to hold on to the football. And once he does that, the sky's the limit for the kid because he's got all the athleticism and the speed to be a big time difference maker. He just got to correct the fumbling. So offensive line, listen, it might be an inexperienced group that is returning, but they got a lot of experience last year and you've supplemented it with a lot of talent through the transfer portal and the 2025 recruiting class. Running back, again, I like the running back room. We'll see who emerges and becomes kind of that primary guy or the 1-2 guys in this group. And listen, we might see some turnover at both of those spots after spring ball in the spring transfer portal, because are you going to keep all 5 of the running backs that are here? If we find out like, hey, Gavin Sawchuk's not going to be one of your 3 best running backs, or Javonte Barnes, are they going to stick around? I don't know. We'll see. The same with the offensive line. If one of the Jakes isn't starting or isn't part of the 2 deep, are they going to stick around, or are they going to look for another opportunity as you've influxed a lot of talent at tackle? So Oklahoma's still got a lot to prove. I know you hear the optimism in our voice and you hear the positive thinking that we're giving you on February the 20th, 6-7 months away from the start of college football season. But don't mistake us. Jay and I both still want to see them prove it on the football field.
Yep.
Before we crown them SEC contenders. What's Oklahoma going to do about the spring game, Jay? Because there's a lot of teams out there that are deciding to pull the curtain closed on spring football. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
Attention fans. The future of college sports is here, and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happen under the table, and fans don't have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support Oklahoma athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, receive exclusive content from the athlete you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Oklahoma athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players.
Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Jay, we're seeing a lot of teams across the country decide not to have spring games. What do you make of this, Jay? Because Nebraska's Matt Rule talked about it first. Now Lincoln Riley at USC has decided they're not going to have a spring game. Where do you stand on this?
So I'm in agreement of getting rid of the spring game for now until things get into regulation. And I explain it for this reason, because the biggest problem with the spring game and why these coaches are getting rid of it is not because of your starting players that are out there looking good and preparing for the regular season. No, it's that backup player that's not ready to play this year, that teams are going to find ways to reach out to their agent, reach out to their parents, reach out to their cousins, brothers, sisters, uncles, nephews, niece, his little baby cousin. They're reaching out to all of them to say, hey, you want an opportunity to start day one? You should come to our school instead of sitting on the bench and waiting behind XYZ player. That's what it is. It's the tampering aspect is where the problem lies. And I mean, think about it this way for Oklahoma. You go out there and you have a lot of, the offensive line is still being developed, just like we talked about in the last segment. But Ryan Fogier does really good with the third strings later on in the spring game. You don't think a school's going to pick up the phone and say, hey, Fogier, we would start you day one instead of sitting behind those losers there at Oklahoma. Why don't you come here? The depth that schools used to have back in the day, that's a thing of the past, because that is the one thing that other schools do. They will play that against you and say, you don't have to sit behind a guy for 2 to 3 years like you used to. You can go somewhere else and play day one. That's why I totally understand why they would do it. And I can see Oklahoma doing the same thing.
Man, I would hate it. I really would. It's a great opportunity to see your team. And this is part of where contracts have to start becoming involved in the sport. So I get what you're saying in minimizing tampering, minimizing the risk of losing important depth pieces at the same time as revenue sharing becomes part of college football. These contracts are going to have to be a part of it too. And so when you sign, whether it's the winter signing period, early signing period, you're signing a contract and you're with me for the year. Whether you like your position on the depth chart or not, you're with me for the year. So we go through the spring season, we go through spring ball, we go through the spring game. You're not on the too deep. Listen, I get you don't like your position. I get other teams want you, but you're contractually obligated to be with Oklahoma until the next transfer portal, until after the 2025 season. So I get it. Teams are afraid of losing players and losing valuable depth. But to me, if you're so concerned about losing valuable depth that you can't show these guys on television or show these guys in a spring game where scouts could be in the crowd and using their binoculars to get a look at Ryan Fogier, then how strong is your program really? How strong is your developmental plan for these kids? How strong are the relationships? How strong is your NIL situation? Because if it just takes one spring game performance to allow a tamper to happen, then your program's not strong to begin with. And I get coaches are paranoid and they stay paranoid, but you got to believe in your system. You got to believe in what you're doing. and understand like this is a big deal for fans. Fans love this kind of thing. It helps generate a lot of support. What are we seeing at basketball right now? Basketball has zero energy for it. There's no confidence. There's no passion or energy for the program. You go through an offseason after Oklahoma just went 6-7 and don't have the opportunity to show your fan base what to be excited about. It's going to be hard to get them, I think, really excited about this team for 2025 until you go win a bunch of games.
Yeah. No, and you're not wrong there. And I agree. I like the spring game. I don't want the spring game to go anywhere. But the other thing behind that is the strength of the program. Totally get where you're coming from with that. The problem you run into with that is that some schools will take their entire NIL budget just to steal away one player. And that's it. Like we saw Texas Tech do that recently. They went after guys in the portal and they just threw a bunch of money at guys that typically they would never go after. And they only do it because they're like, look, we just want one dude. We get this one dude, we're good. And that's snatching it away from a lot of other schools. That is where the problem lies. In the world of parity that people want in collegiate sports, the way that is being achieved is because certain schools are saying we'll give our entire budget to this one dude, this one top player, and that's it. They may not build another roster or anything around them or have any other players to go with it. Nope. They're just going after, they're throwing their Hail Mary for one guy. And if they land it, then that kind of throws things off, especially throws off the numbers for everybody else. But to me, I think this is going to be very short-lived anyway. I think this is the last year that you would see schools actually get rid of their spring game because just like you said, when the house settlement goes down, then you'll actually have those true revenue share contracts to where they'll have people in place for a year. Now, granted, there's most likely going to be some sort of a buyout for people to get out of their contracts that other schools are going to have to play to be able to get them. They're going to find ways to put outs in there, especially once they get into collective bargaining. But because that's kind of like the standard thing on it. But with that being said, because of the limitations at the collegiate level, I don't expect this to be a problem after this year, but I definitely can see it being a problem until this spring portal passes up. Once the spring portal is over, then we'll have another discussion, but I could see Oklahoma considering that too. We've got a lot of young talent, and this staff has done a great job of recruiting the right type of guys. And you made the right point, John. For a lot of people to understand is that you have to get the type of players that fits what you're trying to do and fits the mode of wanting to work. And then that's the guys you got to, that's how you show the culture and the strength of your program. I think Oklahoma has done that. While at the same time, some of these schools, man, they get desperate. They'll do what they can to throw stuff at these guys. And that's where the problem lies.
Yeah. And they will, and Oklahoma will lose guys. Don't mistake me. They're going to lose some guys after the spring game, after spring season, because the roster limitations are such that Oklahoma's going to have to get down to that 105 cap.
Yep.
And whether it's walk-on guys or scholarship guys, I would not be surprised to see one or two of either of those go elsewhere. Yep. And you're just going to see that kind of thing. It happens at the NFL level after the preseason, cut downs happen and guys have to get down to their 53-man roster. And then before they can even get to their practice squad roster, they got to cut guys down. They got to cut them and put them through waivers before they can re-add them back to the practice squad. Oklahoma's going to have to do something similar in processing some dudes. And that's just part of it. But it's also part of why they only went with 18 guys in this 2025 recruiting class. You saw there was a social media post that somebody put out there about their daughter who had signed a soccer scholarship back in the early signing period in December is now being told by her coach that there's not a scholarship for her anymore because of roster limitations that are happening to women's soccer as well. So all of those promised scholarships out there for those classes that were 27 players deep, they might not all stick. And so some of those guys might end up getting processed just after 4 months with the program because of roster limitations that are going to be affecting every college football program in the NCAA system. So listen, Oklahoma's going to lose some guys. Everybody's going to lose guys. It's just going to be part of what happens after spring ball. I just don't think Oklahoma needs to be so concerned about it that they can't try to generate more fan excitement, generate revenue with the spring game, and try and get those tickets sold, that broadcast, the broadcast rights sold, and the advertising dollars that come with being able to broadcast a game. All that stuff's going to matter. But what else matters, Jay? Recruiting. It's recruiting season, and the Oklahoma Sooners got some good news on Wednesday night. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. The Oklahoma Sooners got a couple of Futurecasts for 4-star edge rusher out of Duncanville, KJ Ford. Parker Thune and Brandon Drum of OU Insiders and Rivals issued the Futurecasts on Wednesday evening for KJ Ford. We've discussed him in the past. We both really, really like his game and think he's got the potential to be a big-time playmaker at the collegiate level.
Yeah, I love Kevin Ford. Now, if you've watched me over on my channel on Fair Sports, I've talked about him extensively, and we'll probably have another video going up looking at more film on him, but kid's good. And being from Duncanville, a school that Oklahoma would like to get their hands in and have an opportunity to start snatching up some of those players. Those kids seem to go everywhere in the country, from LSU to Texas to Oregon. They're all over the place. Bama. Oklahoma would like to get their hands on some of those players, and Kevin Ford is one of those players that I think we have a really good chance on. Like you mentioned, Parker Thune and Brandon Drum over there at OU Insider have already put in some Futurecasts that Oklahoma could win him. He's a top 200 player in the country at a 6'3", 225 pounds right now, and he plays a lot bigger than that. Texas A&M was the school to beat, it felt like, for a while. Them and SMU, because we all know SMU is flying up the charts now because of them now moving into a P4 conference. SMU is becoming a problem for a lot of people. But if Oklahoma can land him, he's already visited the school 6 times, and he's got another visit lined up. He's supposed to be coming for spring game. He'll be here in the summer. It sounds like Miguel Chavis has done everything that he's supposed to do to win his services. And, man, that will be a huge boost for this class if he pulls up.
Yeah, Oklahoma doesn't currently have anybody committed on the defensive side of the ball for the 2026 cycle. If you get KJ Ford, Kevin Ford, that would be huge, man. He's a really, really good player that brings an edge and a nastiness to your defensive line, and someone who can play early. I mean, he's got that potential because he's got good athleticism, already has some refined pass rush moves. He plays the run well, and he's got a really, really good motor. So he sounds like a perfect Miguel Chavis defensive end, if you ask me. You said 225. Well, 247 Sports has got him listed at 245. So I don't know if they've got an update for us there, but the dude's already got good size. Even at 225, you know that Schmitty could do something with it to get him up to 240, 245, where he can contribute. A lot of recruiting things happening. Valden Sohn, the Swedish prospect by way of Virginia prep football, is already got a official visit locked in with the Oklahoma Sooners for Champion Barbecue.
Yep. For the 20th of June. That weekend appears to be a massive one. I've got a list of a lot of the names that are coming through, and John, it's getting extensive. So I'm pretty excited to see what the recruiting looks like for the team here. We also got Caden Hall, the number 2 safety based upon On3's top 300 players. He's out of Florida. He's going to be at Oklahoma also on the 20th. So they're in a battle with Penn State, Florida, Florida State, and Alabama for potentially his service. So Brandon Hall is already, he's putting in work for additional good talent to go into that safety room that he's already built into. Personally, I believe is going to be a monster room for us. But he's another big time player that has a good chance of, Oklahoma has a good chance of actually trying to win the services of. 6'3", 175. That's a big safety.
Yeah, Oklahoma's done a really good job recruiting the safety position thanks to Brandon Hall over the years. I mean, they've got a really nice room right now, and I would not be surprised to see them continue to stack impressive talent. Anybody else that's really standing out right now for Oklahoma that you're really high on?
Mason James, the wide receiver out of Norman, Oklahoma. He dropped his top 10. And, of course, the Sooners were on that list. He's considered the number 1 player in the state of Oklahoma based upon On3. Between him and Taj Overton, the defensive tackle out of Owasso up in Tulsa. He is in the Tulsa area, Owasso, Oklahoma. He also is another prospect that I think that Oklahoma can land. If Oklahoma can do a really good job of landing everybody in their backyard first, and then Make sure they expand out, get some Florida kids, California kids, kind of like we did with with Jaden O'Neal as well as Daniel Odom. Class could turn out to be a nice, top 10, top 15 class that we need to make sure that we get our hands on in order to be competitive in the SEC. But Vaughn Sohn coming in and having that visits already, quote unquote, announced he'll officially come and visit, man, I'm stoked for that official visit because he's one big defensive tackle. You get him, you may have solidified yourself there for a couple of years.
Another one that's really fascinating, Josh McCuistion of Sooner Scoop and On3 wrote on Wednesday that the Oklahoma Sooners got an official visit scheduled with Jonathan Hatton. He's the big, bruising, physical running back that was committed as part of the Oklahoma Sooners 2026 recruiting class. The first commitment, if I'm not mistaken, and had been committed for a long time before decommitting and then just kind of opening it up so we could see what the options out there were. Josh McCuistion writing that looked like he was drifting towards Texas A&M, but the Oklahoma Sooners now have his final official visit for Champ U Barbecue. And that would be intriguing. If they could find a way to get that recommitment, I think that'd be huge because the dude is very, very talented.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite running backs in the class. And it was funny because I remember when he committed, it just came out of nowhere. You're like, who's this dude? Don't even remember that. Like, I don't think he made his visit yet. But he was sold on DeMarco Murray and what Oklahoma was doing. And then, like you mentioned, after his junior year, there was a lot of conversation that Texas A&M has started moving in and really starting to work on them, especially with, the way that they've been working with their running backs and, some running backs getting out of there. There's going to be an opportunity for him to probably play extremely early. And Hatton was, he was intrigued by it, decided to decommit, says Oklahoma is still on his list, but he wanted to really open up his recruitment and really get out and do some visits since he committed at such a young age because he was a sophomore when he committed. And then, but now it looks like you said, Oklahoma's got a chance of trying to get him back in the saddle. But because you add him with like a Caden Jones, oh man, that would be crazy. That would be real good. But also you got what's that? Riley Morris, another running back that he's committed. Well, he was committed to Baylor. I think he decommitted now. And it sounds like Oklahoma has a good chance of getting his services too. March and April are going to be crazy months for us as recruiting junkies because this is the time when you're going to start seeing a bunch of decommits, commitments, all the visits being announced. We're going to stay busy.
And a lot's going to depend on how Oklahoma performs this year. If they go and they beat Michigan, you could probably see several commitments happen not long after that. They go and they beat Auburn. They beat Texas. Things are going to change. The trajectory of the opinion on Oklahoma football is going to change drastically. And I think you might see a lot of players take a wait and see approach. But if Oklahoma has success in 2025, they'll be back in the top 10 in the recruiting class rankings. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in, being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Follow Jay at Unfair Sports. Go check out his channel, Unfair Sports, over on YouTube. You can follow me at John9Williams. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at SoonersWire.com. You can also follow the show on all your favorite social media platforms at Locked On Sooners. Sorry, the cold has just got my mouth all mumbled jumbled. I'm surprised I made it through the show. Follow us on all your favorite social media platforms at Locked On Sooners. I hope you all are staying warm out there, staying safe, driving the roads. Be careful out there. Stay home if you can. If you got to get out, just drive slow, drive safe, and take care of your people. Stay warm and bundle up. But for Jay Smith, I'm John Williams. We'll talk to you next time. Boomer.
Sooner. Brr, it's cold.
It's cold.